You ever notice how the dumbest people in the room are always the most confident? Meanwhile, the real experts, they're the ones full of doubt. It's not just annoying, it's a psychological trap. And once you see it, you'll start spotting it everywhere. At work, online, even inside yourself. The answer lies in a fascinating psychological phenomenon discovered over 2 decades ago. In 1999, social psychologists David Dunning and Justin-Kruger published a groundbreaking study that would forever change our understanding of human cognition. Their research identified a cognitive bias that now bears their names, the Dunning-Kruger effect. This phenomenon explains why the least skilled individuals in a domain often dramatically overestimate their abilities, while true experts tend to underestimate theirs. As Dunning himself put it, the first rule of the Dunning-Kruger Club is you don't know you're a member of the Dunning-Kruger Club. Today we'll dive deep into this psychological phenomenon that affects us all to some degree. We'll explore its origins, mechanisms, real-world examples, and most importantly, how to recognize and overcome it in ourselves. Because the greatest paradox of the Dunning-Kruger effect is that the people most susceptible to it are typically the least likely to recognize it in themselves. The discovery of the Dunning-Kruger effect began with an unusual bank robbery. In 1995, MacArthur Wheeler walked into 2 Pittsburgh banks in broad daylight with no disguise, robbed them, and walked out. When arrested later that night, Wheeler was genuinely shocked to learn that surveillance cameras had captured his image. "But I wore the juice," he protested to police. Wheeler had covered his face with lemon juice, believing it would make him invisible to security cameras based on his understanding that lemon juice could be used as invisible ink. This remarkable case caught the attention of psychologist David Dunning, who was fascinated by Wheeler's profound misunderstanding and complete confidence in his flawed logic. It led Dunning to question, how could someone be so incompetent that they didn't even realize their incompetence? He partnered with then-graduate student Justin-Kruger to investigate this phenomenon systematically. In their seminal study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, Dunning and Kruger assessed participants on humor, grammar, and logical reasoning skills. After each test, participants were asked to estimate how well they performed compared to others. The results were striking and consistent. Those who scored in the bottom quartile dramatically overestimated their performance, believing they outperformed 62% of their peers, when they had actually only outperformed 12%. Meanwhile, top performers consistently underestimated their relative performance. As Dunning observed, if you're incompetent, you can't know you're incompetent. The skills you need to produce a right answer are exactly the skills you need to recognize what a right answer is. This creates a double burden of incompetence. Not only do people lack the skills to perform well, but they also lack the metacognitive ability to recognize their deficiency. At its core, the Dunning-Kruger effect stems from a metacognitive deficiency, a failure to accurately assess one's own knowledge and skills. This metacognitive blind spot creates an illusion of superiority that can be remarkably resilient to evidence. The effect operates through several psychological mechanisms. First is the unknown unknowns problem. When we venture into unfamiliar territory, we lack awareness of the full scope of knowledge or skills required. We don't know what we don't know. As Dunning explains, the skills you need to produce the right answer are exactly the same skills you need to evaluate if an answer is right. If you lack expertise in a domain, you also lack the ability to recognize expertise, including the absence of it in your filth. Second is confirmation bias. Once we form a belief about our abilities, we selectively attend to information that supports that belief while discounting contradictory evidence. A novice who believes they're skilled will remember their successes, attribute failures to external factors, and interpret ambiguous feedback positively. Third is the difficulty in accurately calibrating self-assessment. Even when trying to be objective, humans struggle to evaluate themselves without reference points. In the absence of clear feedback or comparison, we tend to rate ourselves above average, a phenomenon known as the above-average effect or illusory superiority. As philosopher Bertrand Russell aptly noted, the whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, but wiser people so full of doubts. This insight captures the essence of the Dunning-Kruger effect. Confidence and competence are often inversely related at the extremes of the knowledge spectrum. While popular culture often portrays the Dunning-Kruger effect as a simple inverse relationship between confidence and competence, the actual relationship is more nuanced. Rather than a linear relationship, researchers have identified a characteristic curve that maps the journey from novice to expert. The journey begins at what some call Mount Stupid, the peak of confidence experienced by absolute beginners who have gained just enough knowledge to feel informed but lack awareness of the vast terrain they haven't yet explored. As Mark Twain wisely observed, it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. After this initial peak comes the valley of despair when continued. Learning reveals the true scope of the domain, causing confidence to plummet. This is the critical juncture where many give up, unable to reconcile their self-image with a newly discovered reality of their limitations. Those who persevere begin the gradual climb up the slope of enlightenment, where competence and confidence slowly increase in tandem. With dedicated practice and learning, they eventually reach the plateau of sustainability, where high competence is matched with appropriately calibrated confidence. What's particularly interesting is how experts often exhibit a slight underconfidence relative to their actual abilities. This expert's uncertainty stems from their comprehensive understanding of the complexity and nuance within their field. They're acutely aware of the boundaries of their knowledge and the vastness of what remains unknown. As Nobel Prize-winning physicist Richard Feynman once said, "I think it's much more interesting to live not knowing than to have answers that might be wrong." This intellectual humility is a hallmark of true expertise, a far cry from the overconfidence of novices. While most experimental evidence for the Dunning-Kruger effect comes from laboratory settings and academic skills, the phenomenon extends far beyond these contexts, permeating virtually every domain of human endeavor. In professional settings, the effect manifests as the unskilled and unaware employee who consistently overrates their performance and contribution. One study found that 95% of managers believe they performed in the top 50% of their peer group, a statistical impossibility. This inflated self-assessment often leads to resistance to feedback, limited professional growth, and interpersonal conflicts. In healthcare, the effect can have life-threatening consequences. Medical students with the lowest skill levels often overrate their clinical abilities, potentially leading to dangerous overconfidence in clinical decision-making. One study found that doctors who were most confident about their diagnoses were not more accurate than their peers, but they were less likely to consult references or seek second opinions. In politics, the effect helps explain why some of the most vociferous voices on complex policy issues often demonstrate the least nuanced understanding. Those with rudimentary knowledge of economics, climate science, or international relations may express absolute certainty in their positions, while experts in these fields typically acknowledge the limitations and uncertainties inherent in their domains. In our digital age, the Dunning-Kruger effect has found a particularly fertile environment. Social media platforms allow individuals with minimal expertise to broadcast their opinions to wide audiences with the same apparent authority as established experts. This democratization of voice, while valuable in many ways, has also created what some researchers call an expertise crisis, a flattening of the perceived difference between novice and expert opinions. As Neil deGrasse Tyson puts it, one of the great challenges in this world is knowing enough about a subject to think you're right, but not enough about the subject to know you're wrong. This captures the essence of how the Dunning-Kruger effect operates beyond academic settings, shaping discourse and decision-making across society. The manifestation of the Dunning-Kruger effect isn't uniform across cultures. Research suggests that cultural factors significantly influence how people assess their own abilities and how pronounced the effect appears in different societies. In Western, particularly American culture, self-promotion and confidence are highly valued. Children are raised to believe in themselves and their potential, creating fertile ground for overestimation of abilities. The American ethos of individual achievement and potential may inadvertently amplify the Dunning-Kruger effect by encouraging positive self-assessment regardless of objective performance. By contrast, many East Asian cultures emphasize humility, self-improvement, and awareness of one's limitations. Studies have found that Japanese students typically rate themselves below average on many dimensions, the opposite of the above-average effect commonly observed in Western samples. This cultural tendency towards self-criticism may actually mitigate the Dunning-Kruger effect by encouraging more conservative self-assessments. Collective versus individualistic societal orientations also impact how the effect manifests. In more collectivist societies where group harmony and interdependence are prioritized, individuals may be more receptive to feedback from others and less likely to maintain inflated self-assessments that contradict group consensus. As Confucius wisely noted, real knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance. Cultures that embed this philosophy into their educational and social systems may naturally cultivate the metacognitive awareness that helps prevent the Dunning-Kruger effect from taking hold. However, no culture is immune to the basic cognitive limitations that underlie the effect. The fundamental challenge of not knowing what you don't know transcends cultural boundaries, even if its expression varies across different societies. While the Dunning-Kruger effect highlights the dangers of overconfidence, it's important to recognize that confidence itself is not inherently problematic. In fact, a certain degree of self-belief is essential for motivation, perseverance, and achievement. Confidence becomes problematic when it's drastically misaligned with actual ability. This misalignment can lead to poor decision-making, resistance to learning, and interpersonal conflicts. However, appropriate confidence based on realistic self-assessment can be highly adaptive and contribute to success. Research in performance psychology has consistently shown that optimal performance typically requires a moderate level of confidence, enough to motivate action and persistence, but not so much that it prevents recognition of mistakes or areas for improvement. This calibrated confidence represents the sweet spot where self-belief aligns with reality. Interestingly, studies suggest that slightly overestimating one's abilities by a small margin may actually be beneficial. In some contexts, this mild positive illusion can increase motivation, help overcome initial challenges, and lead to greater persistence in the face of setbacks. The key distinction is between slight overconfidence that drives effort versus the dramatic overestimation, characteristic of the Dunning-Kruger effect. As psychologist Albert Bandura noted, people who have a sense of self-efficacy bounce back from failures. They approach things in terms of how to handle them, rather than worrying about what can go wrong. This healthy confidence differs fundamentally from the unfounded certainty of those caught in the Dunning-Kruger trap. The challenge, then, is not to eliminate confidence, but to cultivate it in proportion to actual ability, to develop what psychologists call epistemic humility alongside self-efficacy. This balanced approach acknowledges both our capabilities and our limitations. Perhaps the most challenging aspect of the Dunning-Kruger effect is recognizing it in ourselves. By its very nature, the effect blinds us to our own incompetence, creating a stubborn cognitive blind spot that resists self-awareness. The first step toward breaking free from the cycle is accepting the universal vulnerability to this bias. No one, regardless of intelligence or education, is immune to overestimating their abilities in domains where they lack expertise. As intellectual historian Robert Burton writes, the feeling of knowing is not a reliable guide to whether or not you actually know something. Practical strategies for counteracting the effect begin with active solicitation of feedback from others, particularly experts in the relevant domain. External assessment provides the objective perspective that self-assessment often lacks. However, this requires genuine openness to criticism and a willingness to temporarily suspend defensive reactions. Deliberate practice with specific focus on areas of weakness can also help align perceived and actual ability. This practice must include clear, immediate feedback on performance to calibrate self-assessment. Without this feedback loop, practice alone may actually reinforce overconfidence rather than correct it. Cultivating metacognitive awareness, thinking about your thinking, serves as another powerful antidote. Regular reflection on the limits of your knowledge and consciously considering alternative perspectives helps develop the habit of questioning initial certainty. As Socrates wisely observed, the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. Perhaps most challenging but most effective is developing comfort with uncertainty and not knowing. Modern society often rewards quick answers and confident assertions over thoughtful consideration and admission of limitations. Resisting this pressure requires intellectual courage, the willingness to say, "I don't know," or "I'm not sure" when appropriate. As writer and philosopher Aldous Huxley noted, that men do not learn very much from the lessons of history is the most important of all the lessons that history has to teach. Similarly, the most important lesson of the Dunning-Kruger effect may be learning to question our certainty, especially when we feel most confident. Our information ecosystem has undergone radical transformation in recent decades, creating new dimensions to the Dunning-Kruger effect. The internet has democratized access to information, allowing anyone to gain surface-level familiarity with virtually any topic through a few quick searches. This easy access to information can create an illusion of understanding that amplifies the Dunning-Kruger effect. The structure of social media platforms further compounds the problem by rewarding confident assertions over nuanced expertise. Algorithms tend to promote content that generates engagement, which often means strong, unequivocal statements, rather than careful, qualified analyses. This creates an environment where the loudest, most confident voices gain prominence, regardless of actual expertise. Filter bubbles and echo chambers exacerbate these tendencies by shielding individuals from contradictory information that might challenge their perceived expertise. When surrounded only by those who share similar perspectives or levels of understanding, there are few opportunities to recognize one's limitations. The sheer volume of information available online also contributes to what researchers call knowledge fragmentation, the acquisition of discrete facts without the conceptual frameworks needed to integrate them meaningfully. This fragmented knowledge creates the sensation of understanding without its substance. As author Tom Nichols writes in The Death of Expertise, the internet lets us contact and interact with many more people than we would normally encounter in our daily lives, but it can also give us the false impression that our views are more widely shared and more correct than they actually are. The solution isn't to abandon digital information sources, but to approach them with greater metacognitive awareness. This includes recognizing that reading an article doesn't make you an expert, understanding the difference between access to information and comprehension of complex systems, and cultivating digital literacy skills that help distinguish between credible and questionable sources. As writer Maria Popova eloquently states, critical thinking without hope is cynicism, but hope without critical thinking is naivety. This balanced approach is essential for navigating the complexities of knowledge acquisition in the digital age. While the Dunning-Kruger effect operates at the individual level, its cumulative impact shapes societies, institutions, and public discourse in profound ways. Understanding these broader implications helps us recognize the effect not just as a psychological curiosity, but as a significant social force. In democratic systems, the effect influences electoral outcomes when voters with limited policy knowledge confidently assess complex proposals based on superficial understanding. This can lead to support for simplistic solutions to multifaceted problems and vulnerability to populist rhetoric that offers certainty in place of nuance. In organizational contexts, the effect can distort hiring and promotion decisions when those with limited competence but high confidence outshine more capable but modest candidates. Over time, this can lead to what researchers call confidence cascades, where entire organizational cultures begin to value and reward displays of certainty over actual performance. In scientific communication and public health, the effect creates resistance to expert guidance when individuals with minimal subject knowledge feel equally qualified to evaluate evidence as those with specialized training. This dynamic has been particularly evident during the COVID-19 pandemic, where confident non-experts often challenged public health recommendations based on limited understanding of epidemiology. The effect also influences educational systems, particularly when students or parents with strong opinions but limited pedagogical knowledge advocate for educational approaches that contradict evidence-based practices. This can undermine educational effectiveness and teacher authority. Philosopher Hannah Arendt's observation becomes particularly relevant. The ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the convinced communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction, true and false, no longer exists. While less dramatic, the erosion of epistemic authority through the Dunning-Kruger effect creates similar vulnerabilities in democratic societies. Addressing these societal implications requires both individual metacognitive development and institutional reforms that better distinguish between confidence and competence, that reward intellectual humility alongside demonstrated ability, and that create better systems for evaluating and communicating specialized knowledge. The journey through the Dunning-Kruger effect reveals a fundamental paradox of human knowledge. The more we learn, the more we recognize how much we don't know. As our circle of knowledge expands, so too does our perimeter of contact with the unknown. This paradox creates the counterintuitive trajectory we've explored, from the unearned confidence of novices to the calibrated uncertainty of experts. It explains why true mastery is often marked not by absolute certainty, but by comfort with complexity, nuance, and the limits of current understanding. Understanding the Dunning-Kruger effect offers us a powerful lens for self-reflection and intellectual growth. It reminds us that the path to genuine knowledge begins with recognizing our limitations and embracing the discomfort of uncertainty. It encourages us to cultivate both the confidence to act and the humility to learn. As we navigate an increasingly complex world filled with confident voices offering simplified certainties, the awareness of this cognitive bias becomes ever more valuable. It helps us distinguish between hollow confidence and earned expertise, both in ourselves and in others. Perhaps most importantly, understanding the Dunning-Kruger effect inspires a more compassionate view of human error. When we recognize that overconfidence often stems not from arrogance, but from the very structure of knowledge acquisition, we can approach disagreements with greater patience and intellectual charity. In the words of physicist Richard Feynman, I believe that a scientist looking at non-scientific problems is just as dumb as the next guy. This humility from one of history's greatest scientific minds captures the essence of what the Dunning-Kruger effect teaches us: that wisdom begins not with certainty, but with the recognition of how much we have yet to learn. By embracing this paradox, that knowledge reveals ignorance, that understanding unveils complexity, we open ourselves to deeper learning, more productive discourse, and a more accurate calibration between confidence and competence. So here's the real paradox. The more you actually know, the less certain you feel. But the less you know, the more certain you act. Which side do you think you're on right now? Drop it in the comments. And remember, confidence is easy, but wisdom starts with, I might be wrong. This was only the surface. Want more? Hit subscribe and dive into Cypher.